A few years ago, my friends Jacob, Isaac, and I found ourselves craving an adventure. We wanted to break away from our daily routines and do something that would get our hearts racing. After some brainstorming, we decided to go camping in a national forest, mixing in a bit of paintball for some extra thrill. It was a plan that felt both exhilarating and a little reckless, perfect for a weekend escape. As the week flew by, we threw ourselves into preparations. We gathered gear, packed supplies, and spent evenings laughing about all the wild scenarios we might face. Would we run into a bear? Would one of us trip and fall into a muddy creek? The thought of our potential misadventures only fueled our excitement. Friday afternoon finally arrived, and we packed up my old, rusted F-150 with paintball gear, food, tents, and all the essentials we could think of. We set off, the engine rumbling like a wild beast eager to roam the wilderness. The drive felt like it took forever, but the thrill of the upcoming adventure kept our spirits high. As we traveled deeper into the forest, towering trees began to loom over us, and the world outside our windows transformed into a green blur. But as we ventured further, our cell signals vanished, leaving us with no connection to the outside world. "Perfect," Jacob joked, grinning from ear to ear. "No phones, no distractions, just a real camping trip." We all laughed, not realizing how eerie that comment would soon turn out to be. When we finally reached a popular camping area, our hearts sank. The site was already taken over by a massive church group. Families and kids sprawled everywhere, creating a chaotic scene that was far from the peaceful retreat we had envisioned. With the sun dipping low in the sky, we had no choice but to keep driving deeper into the woods, following winding gravel roads that felt like they were leading us into the unknown. The forest was getting darker, the road bumpier, and the trees thicker, casting long, ominous shadows across our path. An hour into our search for solitude, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The air was thick and heavy, and a stillness hung around us that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. But we had come too far to turn back now. Eventually, we found ourselves on an old, overgrown road. A large mound of dirt blocked part of the path, looking like it had been put there to keep vehicles out. Tire tracks showed someone had crossed it before, so, with some hesitation, I nudged the truck over the mound. After a bumpy ride that felt like an eternity, we finally stumbled upon a small clearing by a creek, a perfect spot to set up camp. Thick trees surrounded us, creating a natural barrier of shadows. It felt isolated, like we were the last people on Earth. As we unloaded, an unsettling vibe crept over me. Blue tarps were strung haphazardly between the trees, flapping lightly in the breeze like tattered flags. An old plywood table was nailed to one of the trunks, littered with strange objects and bits of trash. Cans lay scattered around, some crushed and others stained with dark, unidentifiable substances. I glanced at Jacob and Isaac, but they just shrugged it off, trying to appear relaxed. "Guess someone camped here recently," Jacob said, poking an empty soda can with his foot. But I could see the unease creeping into his eyes, the way he kept glancing over his shoulder. "Or maybe more than just camping," I said, pointing to a half-buried bottle in the dirt. As I wiped off the mud, I realized it was a large, empty bottle of insecticide. Not exactly the type of thing people typically carry into the forest. Ignoring the strange setting, we set up our tent, gathered wood for a fire, and started cooking. Jacob stirred chai while Isaac and I unpacked the rest of our gear, trying to shake off the strange feeling that lingered in the air. The forest felt almost watchful, the silence so deep that it was unsettling, as if we were being scrutinized by unseen eyes. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a blanket of darkness over us, we finally sat down to eat. The night was pitch black, save for our small fire casting flickering orange light on the surrounding trees. As we dug into our food, I felt a chill run down my spine, a nagging feeling of being watched. I kept glancing around, my nerves fraying, convincing myself it was just the shadows playing tricks on my mind. Then, something caught my attention, a strange glow over a nearby hill, soft yet undeniably present. At first, I thought it was merely moonlight filtering through the trees, but as I focused, I realized the angle was all wrong. This light was too steady, too cold. It didn't emit the warm orange ray of our campfire or the soft white glow of the moon. It was something else entirely, a pale, unsettling light that reminded me of streetlights in an empty city. But we were miles away from civilization. "What's that?" I asked, nodding toward the hill. Jacob squinted into the darkness. "Maybe it's just someone else camping out here?" "Could be," I replied slowly. "But who would camp this far out? And what kind of light is that?" Curiosity got the better of us. Jacob stood up, brushing dirt off his pants. "Let's go check it out. What's the worst that could happen?" Isaac laughed and shook his head. "You two are crazy. I'll stay here and keep the fire going." He grabbed a handful of popcorn kernels and tossed them into a pan over the flames. "Good luck chasing your ghost lights," he chuckled, his voice laced with a hint of nervousness. Armed with our flashlights, Jacob and I ventured toward the mysterious glow. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sound being our footsteps crunching on the dry leaves. Every step echoed, and the shadows around us seemed to stretch and shift, as if they were alive. The further we walked, the more suffocating the air became, heavy and thick, pressing down on us like an invisible weight. As we climbed the hill, we noticed that the trees around us bore strange markings. Their bark had been stripped away in perfect circles, as if something had gnawed or cut them with precision. We exchanged nervous laughs, joking about a ghost beaver that roamed the forest, but the tension was evident in Jacob's face. We both sensed that something was off. "Do you see those marks?" Jacob asked, his voice low. "It's like someone or something was here and didn't want to leave a trace." "Yeah, it's creepy," I replied, trying to maintain a brave front. But deep down, I felt the unease grow, twisting in my stomach. Just as we reached the top of the hill, Jacob suddenly tripped over something hidden in the underbrush. "Oh crap!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the stillness, shattering the eerie calm. Instantly, the glow vanished. It didn't flicker or fade, it just blinked out, as if someone had flipped a switch. We froze, exchanging terrified glances, our breath hitching in our throats. "Maybe we don't need to find out what that was," I whispered, attempting to lighten the mood with a shaky laugh. "Yeah, let's get back," Jacob replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The air felt thick with tension as we turned to head back down the hill, every instinct screaming that we needed to get away. As we retraced our steps, the shadows seemed to close in around us. The forest felt alive, the trees whispering secrets that we couldn't decipher. My heart raced, the silence around us almost suffocating. Each crack of a twig or rustle of leaves sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. When we finally reached the campsite, Isaac looked up, surprised to see us back so soon. "What happened? Did you find the ghost lights?" "We didn't see anything," I replied, forcing a laugh that felt too tight in my throat. "But it definitely felt like something was out there." Jacob nodded, his face pale. "Let's just eat and try to get some sleep." The three of us gathered around the fire, eating the last of our chai in silence. The light from the flames flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the trees. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that unseen eyes were peering at us from the darkness beyond the fire's reach. As the night deepened, we decided to call it a day. We crawled into our tent, the fabric feeling thin and inadequate against the vast, dark forest. I lay there, heart racing, listening to the sounds of the night, the rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, and the soft creaks of the trees swaying in the wind. But there was something else, an occasional sound that didn't belong. It was a low, rhythmic thumping, almost like a heartbeat, echoing from deep within the woods. It seemed to grow louder, pulsing in time with my own heart, and I felt a cold sweat bead on my forehead. I turned to Jacob, who lay beside me, his eyes wide and glistening with fear. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. "Yeah," he replied, his voice trembling. "What is that?" Before I could answer, Isaac poked his head into the tent. "Hey, you guys okay? You look freaked out." "We're fine," Jacob said, but I could hear the quiver in his voice. "Just a little uneasy." "Let's try to get some sleep," Isaac suggested, but I could see the worry etched on his face too. We huddled together under our sleeping bags, trying to block out the eerie sounds surrounding us. Sleep came slowly, and I drifted in and out of consciousness, each time jolted awake by the rhythmic thumping that felt like it was getting closer. At some point during the night, I was jolted awake by a sudden crash outside our tent. My heart raced, and I shot up, adrenaline flooding my system. "What was that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Don't know," Jacob muttered, fear etched on his face. "Maybe it's a branch or something." I held my breath, straining to hear. The thumping sound had stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence. The only sound was the rustle of the wind in the trees, a sound that felt ominous and foreboding. "Should we check it out?" I asked, glancing at Jacob. He shook his head, eyes wide. "No way. We should stay put." "Come on, we can't just sit here," I urged, feeling a surge of courage. "We need to know what's going on." With a shaky breath, I crawled out of the tent, Jacob reluctantly following behind me. The night air was cold against my skin, sending chills down my spine. We stepped outside, the fire now reduced to glowing embers, casting long, flickering shadows. "What do you see?" Isaac whispered, peering out of the tent. I scanned the area, heart pounding in my chest. Just then, I noticed something strange. The blue tarps that had been flapping earlier were now eerily still, hanging like ghostly sheets between the trees. My pulse quickened, and I glanced at Jacob, who looked just as confused. "Did you see that?" I whispered, pointing to the tarps. Before he could answer, a low growl echoed through the trees, chilling us to the bone. It was deep and guttural, sending shivers down my spine. I glanced at Isaac, who looked terrified. "Back inside. Now," he hissed, scrambling into the tent. Jacob and I hurried after him, heart rates racing. We squeezed into the tent, zipping it tight as we tried to catch our breath. "What the hell was that?" Jacob exclaimed, his voice shaking. "I don't know," I replied, my mind racing. "But we need to stay quiet." The three of us lay there in the darkness, the thumping sound returning, louder this time, like a giant heartbeat pounding in the night. It felt like the forest was alive, the very ground pulsing beneath us. Suddenly, we heard something moving outside, branches snapping and leaves crunching underfoot. The growl came again, closer this time, making my heart drop into my stomach. "Is it getting closer?" Isaac whispered, his voice trembling. "I think so," I said, my mind racing with fear. "We need to get out of here." "But where do we go?" Jacob said, panic creeping into his voice. We can't just run into the woods. I glanced around the tent, searching for a plan. We need to grab our gear and make a run for the truck, I said, my heart pounding. We can't stay here. Taking a deep breath, I unzipped the tent flap, peeking outside. The forest was dark, the shadows stretching like fingers reaching for us. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I stepped out, followed by Jacob and Isaac, who hesitated, glancing around nervously. "Let's go," I urged, and we took off running toward the truck, the darkness swallowing us whole. As we sprinted, I felt the thumping grow louder, almost in sync with our frantic footsteps. The growl was now a roar, echoing in the night. I dared not look back, fear pushing me forward. We reached the truck, breathless and panicked, scrambling to open the doors. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking as I tried to get the engine started. "Hurry," Jacob shouted, glancing back into the woods. "It's coming." Finally, the engine roared to life, and I slammed the gear into drive. I hit the gas, spinning the tires as we tore down the overgrown road, the trees blurring past us in the dark. I didn't stop until we hit the main road, the familiar sights of civilization rushing back into view. The fear slowly began to fade, replaced by sheer relief. We pulled over to catch our breath, hearts still racing. "What the hell just happened?" Isaac gasped, his face pale. "I don't know," I said, shaking my head. "But I don't think we're ever camping again." Jacob nodded in agreement, his voice still trembling. "Let's just get home and forget this ever happened." As we drove away, the forest receded into the distance, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed us, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the next chance to strike. We turned and headed back down the hill, every nerve on high alert. The darkness felt thicker now, almost alive, wrapping around us as we walked in silence, occasionally glancing over our shoulders. When we finally saw the faint glow of our campfire in the distance, relief washed over me until I noticed someone moving by the fire. It was a figure in a hooded jacket, crouched low, rummaging through our things. He seemed to be holding something, our paintball gear, I thought. My stomach dropped. "Isaac?" I called, my voice trembling slightly. But the figure didn't respond, didn't even look up. Then we heard footsteps behind us, and we turned to see Isaac walking up the path, a puzzled look on his face. "Did you find the ghost light?" he asked, grinning. We saw something," I stammered, unable to take my eyes off the figure by the fire. "Were you just over there?" Isaac looked confused. "No, I was down the road." "Why?" My heart pounded as I looked back at the campfire. The figure was gone. The area around the fire was empty, as if nothing had happened. I didn't know what to say, but I didn't want to freak him out. Back at the fire, the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. Jacob kept glancing at the trees, and Isaac noticed. "What's going on with you guys?" he asked. We told him about the figure, trying to play it down, but he didn't laugh. He just got quiet, his face pale. Finally, I broke the silence. "Let's pack up and leave," I said, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "We can head back to my place for the night." None of us argued. Too shaken to pack properly, we just collapsed the tent, threw everything into the truck, and jumped in. I turned the key, and we sped down the gravel road, desperate to leave that place behind. But as we approached the dirt mound that had blocked our path earlier, my stomach dropped. This time, there was a metal barrier across the road, something that hadn't been there before. I stopped the truck, and we stared in horror. Someone or something had put it there, trapping us. "I'm not getting out," Jacob whispered, his voice trembling. I clenched the wheel, heart racing. and slowly nudged the truck forward, gently pushing the barrier until it shifted just enough for us to squeeze by. As we cleared the mound and hit the open road, I glanced in the rearview mirror and my blood ran cold. A dark car with its headlights off was following us, keeping just enough distance to stay in the shadows. Isaac noticed it too. "Drive faster," he urged, voice barely above a whisper. I pressed down on the gas, the truck bouncing on the rough road, the car still lurking behind us, always there, like a silent predator. Every time I glanced back, it was there, a black shape blending with the night, refusing to let us escape. Finally, we reached the main road, and the car seemed to vanish, melting into the darkness as if it had never been there. We drove in silence, too shaken to speak, each of us lost in our own thoughts. By the time we got back home, exhaustion weighed on us, but none of us dared sleep. We just sat in the living room, staring at the wall, each of us haunted by the same unspoken question. What had we really seen out there? To this day, I don't know what was waiting for us in those woods, or who or what was watching us from the shadows. All I know is that I'm never going back.